Hi, today Ben Devolve, Nick Matalo, Jeremy Toledano, Emily Struble, and I will be discussing the history of Zimbabwe currency and the journey from inflation to dollarization.
Here's a quick overview of what we will be exploring in our presentation today. It will include a brief history of Zimbabwe, hyperinflation factors, the inflation solution, long-term impacts of the inflation solution, and the Zimbabwean currency and inflation today.
My name is Ben Devolve, and I'll be going over how this nation's history has played a role in leading up to the world's highest inflation ever seen, as well as certain policies and political decisions implemented. So, although this is certainly not a history class, the timeline of events should start in 1889, where the British presence started. Really, from that point on, for the next 100 years, the Zimbabwe has been fighting for independence from English colonization. So that's what started in 1889. From 1900 to 1970, there were racial and land disputes, which led to guerrilla wars, and this evidently led to the UN putting on economic sanctions. So this plays a very important role where inflation starts, though there's not a lot of data, since this is at an older time period and a smaller country. It's been reported to be around 15 to 25%. The reason why this inflation really started here is because the UN economic sanctions forced, and as we've discussed in class, forced black market and shady transactions. So this is why it became very difficult for Zimbabwe to access key materials for production in agriculture, which was the country's main economic output. So this led to, again, and tobacco and mineral exports is a great example of those, and this is what led to the inflation then. In 2003, there was land reform, poor policy decisions, and environmental challenges, which led to an inflation of 500%. This is the starting point of where the country's currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, becomes practically useless. At a level of 500%, there's just no buying power. In 2008, which is what was studied in class, inflation reached 79.6 billion% per month in November of 2008. This is a rather incomprehensible number, and it is because there's really not much coming back from this. There's not much, tightening that can be done. This is simply their only option was to dollarize. So, and also to make matters worse, the World Bank and IMF cut aid due to different white-owned farms being forced acquired in the country, and so this led to more guerrilla warfare. So dollarization in 2009, as was studied in class, and one of my colleagues will touch on this further, but inflation obviously dropped to single digits due to dollarization. However, Zimbabwe was certainly disadvantaged when trading with local partners because it was not able to produce in cheaper for the world market. So this eventually led to 10 years later implementing the managed float or multi-currency system. So even though inflation was finally under control due to dollarization, they definitely wanted independence from the US dollar so that they could get this benefit when trading with their local currency with local partners. So this is why they chose the managed float. However, due to the structure and the different policy decisions for this country, it has always been a struggle, the inflation story.
My name is Samantha, and I'm now going to be discussing the specific factors that led to Zimbabwe's extreme hyperinflation. So although many decisions and policies can be attributed to Zimbabwe's worsening inflation, one of the main catalysts was the poorly planned land reform by Robert Mugabe's government. In the early 2000s, the government seized over 23 million acres of land from white commercial farmers, and they redistributed this land to black Zimbabwean farmers. The commercial farmers left to continue farming in Nigeria, Ghana, and Zambia, and they took their knowledge of the land and their best practices with them. So the new farmers lacked resources and agricultural knowledge, and as a result, food production fell drastically and food prices soared. Zimbabwe was once known as the breadbasket of Africa, but they then saw their food production drop over 60% in the 10 years following Mugabe's land reforms. As a result of the land reforms, banks who had previously used the land titles as collateral when extending credit to farmers became saddled with bad debt. The lack of land titles and the uncertain political and economic atmosphere resulted in many banks becoming unwilling to loan money, which dramatically decreased economic output and capital development. Foreign direct investment dropped from $444 million in 1998 to only $3.8 million in 2003. Additionally, the Zimbabwean government began to print currency at a mass scale, which fueled the hyperinflation. They printed money to import enough food to avoid mass starvation. They also printed money to finance military action in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And finally, they printed currency in order to meet their obligations with both foreign and domestic creditors. Overall, Mugabe's land reforms, the hesitancy of banks, and wide-scale currency printing led to some of the worst inflation seen in history.
Hello, my name is Nick, and today I'll be discussing hyperinflation solutions that Zimbabwe put in place to deal with its severe hyperinflation crisis. At its peak in 2008, inflation reached an astonishing 89.7 sextillion%, rendering the Zimbabwean dollar virtually worthless. To tackle this crisis, Zimbabwe took a series of bold steps. The first and most significant solution was dollarization. In 2009, Zimbabwe abandoned its local currency and allowed the use of foreign currencies, such as the US dollar. By doing this, the government effectively removed hyperinflated Zimbabwean dollar from circulation. Dollarization immediately stabilized prices, curbed inflation, and restored confidence in the economy. People could finally transact in a stable and reliable currency, which was a critical step in regaining public trust. However, dollarization alone wasn't enough. The government also pursued economic reforms to address the underlying structural issues. A key focus was implementing fiscal discipline to reduce government overspending and budget deficits, which had been a major contributor to the hyperinflation crisis. Additionally, Zimbabwe invested in its agricultural sector to boost the production of key exports such as tobacco, which provided much-needed foreign currency. Policies to attract foreign investments were also introduced, aimed at rebuilding critical sectors like mining and manufacturing. Despite these efforts, relying solely on foreign currencies presented its own challenge, including a loss of monetary sovereignty. To address this, Zimbabwe introduced the RTGS dollar in 2019, a new local currency tied to electronic payments and bond notes. The idea was to reduce dependency on foreign cash while giving the country more control over its monetary policy. While the RTGS dollar has faced criticism and ongoing challenges, it represents an attempt to balance stability with the need for a sovereign currency. In conclusion, Zimbabwe's experience highlights the complexity of recovering from hyperinflation. The combination of dollarization, fiscal discipline, and the attempts to regain monetary sovereignty through the RTGS dollar underscores the multifaceted approach required to stabilize an economy.
Zimbabwe's decision to adopt dollarization in 2009 brought significant changes to the economy, both positive and negative. First, economic stabilization was the immediate and most apparent benefit. By using foreign currencies like the US dollar, Zimbabwe effectively curbed hyperinflation, restored price stability, and normalized everyday transactions. This helped rebuild some confidence in the economy. However, the loss of monetary sovereignty was a major drawback. By giving up control of its currency, Zimbabwe no longer had the ability to print money or adjust monetary policy to respond to economic challenges, leaving it at the mercy of external factors. On the positive side, dollarization imposed fiscal discipline on the government. Without the option to print money recklessly, spending had to align more closely with actual revenues. This reduced fiscal deficits, which had been a key driver of hyperinflation. The banking sector faced significant challenges as well. Liquidity shortages became a persistent problem, with banks unable to lend effectively, which hindered economic growth and limited access to credit for businesses and individuals. Another long-term impact was the dependence on foreign currency. This reliance made Zimbabwe vulnerable to global currency fluctuations and reduced its competitiveness in international markets. It also created logistical issues such as a lack of smaller denominations for everyday transactions. Finally, public trust in local currencies eroded. Even when attempts were made to reintroduce a Zimbabwean currency, citizens were highly skeptical given the trauma of hyperinflation. This distrust remains a barrier to economic independence today. In summary, while dollarization provided short-term relief by stabilizing the economy, it came at the cost of reduced sovereignty, lingering structural challenges, and ongoing dependency on foreign currencies.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Struble, and I'm going to be talking about the state of inflation and currency in Zimbabwe today. Right now, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, or the RBZ, is really trying to wean the country off of the dollar. They want to establish their own national currency with anchored inflation expectations and stabilized prices. In the last 25 years, the RBZ has actually launched a total of 6 currencies to try to achieve these goals. The most recent is the Zimbabwe Gold, or ZiG. This is a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, which is essentially just a digital fiat currency issued by the central bank. It's backed by other assets like gold and other foreign currencies. Zimbabwe is actually pretty revolutionary in that it is just one of 4 countries to officially have launched a CBDC. These types of currencies are still being researched and experimented with elsewhere, and the ZiG was just launched in April of this year. So it's still unclear if the currency will actually be successful in the long run. However, as of right now, the ZiG's performance does seem a little shaky. Just back in September, the RBZ devalued the currency by 40%, making the local ZiG USD exchange rate 24-1. Its success also hinges on Zimbabwe citizens willingly adopting and actually using the currency. This statistic has grown over the past few months, but as of right now, only 40% of transactions in Zimbabwe are paid for in this new CBDC. And the USD remains the dominant currency across the nation. Only time will tell if this currency will actually help Zimbabwe wean off the dollar while keeping inflation at bay.